So we come now to our final class, looking at the life of Elijah. And we come off the back of quite a dramatic week last week, don't we? We really tried to put ourselves there into the picture of the events of Mount Carmel. A drastic and as we said, a dramatic event in this story. We tried to feel like we were the people there watching the anticipation, the excitement growing as the 450 prophets of Baal started to dance around this altar, started to cry unto their God. And we saw that excitement would have turned to awkwardness, embarrassment, and then disgust as these grown men were cutting themselves, offering themselves up, nothing, hour after hour after hour, till they slipped down, slipping on the blood and exhausted from the heat of chanting and shouting all day. It was a pitiful and a pathetic scene in the end. And that was Elijah's plan. He didn't just want to show that God was powerful. If he did that, he could have gone first. The whole thing could have been over in 10 minutes. But he really wanted to impress in the people just how useless, how powerless Baal was that they'd committed their lives to for the last 50 or 60 years. And so he showed how pathetic Baal was. And then he set up and he showed in contrast, not the maniac chanting of prophets, but this well thought out, well executed. Every little word in that section had a meaning and a lesson back to the people. It was smart and intelligent worship. And there in response to that, the fire came down from heaven and devoured all of that as God answered Elijah's prayer. A physical sign that God was there. We'd seen the development of Ahab as well, didn't we? As Ahab went from being this spineless person to, as we suggested, consenting to the prophets of Baal being slaughtered. And then Elijah, who couldn't even speak 2 words peaceably to Ahab before, now sitting down and having a meal with him, suggesting that Ahab truly had converted. And then Elijah running forth in front of him as a sign of honour, that finally now the king, the people and the prophet were all together on God's side. And that's the dramatic events that we saw. And it concluded with Elijah, with superhuman energy, in the pouring rain, running forward here on a spiritual high. And what a contrast to the chapter that we've just read now. Instead here, we see Elijah spiritually broken, no energy whatsoever, and lying in the middle of a dry desert. And how can you go from one extreme to another in just a few verses, in a few hours, as it would sort of here with Elijah? And that's what we want to look at this evening as we conclude looking at the development of the character of Elijah. And it's important that this chapter is recorded for us here. If we were going to write the story of Elijah, or if a man wrote the Bible, we'd be tempted to leave this chapter out, wouldn't we? As we've just said, it concludes on such a high note before. You would just sort of tuck this one away and have the lesson of Elijah and what a great example he was. That's not how God records his life. He records the ups and the downs, the honest and the raw situation of this prophet, struggling to deal with his understanding of God. And it's important for that reason, isn't it? We can sometimes look at the Bible, we can look at characters like Abraham and Moses and David and these people that just had it all together or seemed to. There was no doubt in their minds. They had it all there. They were at one with God. We can look at our own ups and downs and our own trials in life and think, we just can't relate. But here, when we have chapters like this, we see the real people that they were, that they struggled with their faith. They struggled with these issues, with the mental issues here that Elijah's struggling with. And God didn't dismiss them. God patiently works through with Elijah here, helps him come out the other side, stronger and better, as God does with all of the Bible characters, as he does with us, and as we'll see he does with Elijah. But when I was looking at this chapter, there's a lot of lessons that can come from this. We can sometimes think that if I'm not perfect, God won't accept me. Sometimes in the truth it's easier to avoid problems than face it, we can think. You're only as good as the things that you do. You're only worthwhile in the truth if you're successful. That life in the truth is easy. That life in the truth is fair. Or maybe that the problems in our life are due to our sins or our failures always. All of these things we can think. But all of these things do not apply to Elijah in this situation. None of these things are relevant to what Elijah is going through here. We can reassure ourselves on these things because none of these apply, and this is what's happening to Elijah's life now. And so with that as an introduction, building up the importance of this chapter for us, let's look what happened here. As we said, Elijah runs through and he sits down at the gates of Jezreel. He's come here. He's ran through there, up from Mount Carmel, down the valley of Jezreel, and there he's in the gate of Jezreel. Jezreel means God soweth. And we saw last class that that's what Elijah had done there on Carmel, hadn't he? He had dug that trench big enough to contain the seed, and then he had poured the water into that. So he had planted that seed, and now God was going to sow. But unfortunately, we see Elijah never gave God the chance. He ran away before God could sow. And just bear that in your mind, because when we come to the end of our talk this evening, we'll see a man that in fact did allow God and fulfilled the end of that. But here he is. He's on a physical and a spiritual high, sitting here at the gate, waiting for Ahab to come back. And don't forget, we mentioned there's real evidence that Ahab actually genuinely converted here. He also was on a spiritual high, so he rushes up to tell Jezebel all about this. We read this, verse 1. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and without he had slain all the prophets with the sword. And the way that this is recorded tells us exactly what happened. How else could we describe the events of what had just occurred? Well, he could have told Jezebel how the prophets of Baal had failed, how fire came down exactly as Elijah had said, how that the prophets of Baal had given up and were slain, and then the rain had come back just as Elijah had promised. That's the same description as the day, but that's not how Ahab describes it to Jezebel. You see, and then this is the weak, spineless Ahab that we've seen throughout this. That he comes back into the presence of Jezebel and he falters, and immediately he capitulates and he gives in to her temptation. And on one level it shows the warning and the dangers of joining together with someone who has such a negative influence on us. Here it's in the context of a romantic relationship, but there's lots of other types of relationship where this principle applies. If we place so much importance on someone's approval, on someone's validation, as Ahab did with Jezebel, then we put ourselves in danger of this situation as well. But however, maybe a more applicable lesson to us would if we look at this scenario as Jezebel as our internal nature. And that's often how she's described. She stirred up Ahab. She was a temptation to him. He kept giving in to her. The same type of language, same as our nature. And we see that as soon as he runs back into her presence, he gives in to that temptation. And unfortunately, that can be the problem with these showy events of power that Ahab had just seen. You see, he had just come off the back of seeing fire come down from heaven, of seeing rain come out of the sky at someone's prayer, of seeing Elijah superhumanly run for hours in front of him. And yet, off the back of seeing these amazing things, his resolve and his conviction does not stand up to this temptation. And then we understand that. It can be like that with us when we come back from a Bible school or from a special effort. We're pumped up, we're on a spiritual high, but by the end of the week we find ourselves slipping back into those same habits that we promised we weren't going to do, or wasting all that time that we said we would use wisely. And that can be the problem. Yes, shots in the arm are great and they are helpful, but it doesn't help us with facing temptation on long term. What Ahab needed was a strong foundation built on a consistent application of the still, small voice every day to build up his faith and his conviction, so he had a foundation to resist the temptation. And that is what God wanted Elijah to do now with the people. They had seen the showy acts. They had had that jot in the arm. And now it was Elijah's work to go out and to sow the seed and to spread the still small voice and build up that conviction. But as we'll see, unfortunately, that's not what Elijah had in his mind. Because we see verse 2, so Ahab tells Jezebel, then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of these by the morrow at that time. And when he saw, he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. Now, there's a lot of commentary and discussion about what exactly happened. What happened here with Elijah? Maybe you've got your own thoughts on that. Some people say that this was a crisis of faith, that he ran for his life in fear. People say, well, he couldn't have been afraid. He's the mighty Elijah. Well, why did he run then? And I think the record gives us a few clues as to what Elijah is thinking at this time. But we can say right from the outset that this doesn't have to be logical. In fact, it's not. His whole life, his whole plan had come crushing down around him. He's struggling with depression here. He's completely lost and unsure. He doesn't think rationally and logically. As people if you've experienced mental depression or mental issues, there's not a logical step process here. We can't find necessarily logic in here. But we do have some hints in the record. You see, for the last 3.5 years, Elijah had been planning all of these events out meticulously. And we know that, didn't we? We saw last class. Every little thing that he did have a meaning. Every word he said drew back to something in the Old Testament or some lesson he was trying to teach. So he'd been planning this whole thing out. And I think that the reality of this scenario had never ever occurred to Elijah, that he could possibly be in this point of his life right now. The idea that God would send fire from heaven, that the people would turn back to God, that the king would join their side, that they would slay the prophets, God would send back the rain, everything had gone perfectly to his plan. And everything had occurred to him that the next step is then the whole nation now had been proved that God was real and they would turn back to God. And then suddenly he sees that Ahab and Jezebel haven't turned back to God. Well, if they haven't, then the nation hasn't. And he can't understand. The whole plan is gone. Why hasn't it worked? And you see, Elijah had nothing left. If they don't respond to the fire, if they don't respond to the rain, they don't respond to people killing the prophets, well, I've got nothing left. There's nothing left we can do for these people. He's shocked. What else do I have? And God's going to show him, well, there's another way, Elijah. You could try talking to the people. You could try spending time with them, like you did with the woman of Zarephath. But right now in Elijah's mind, it's failed as far as he can see. But see, Carmel wasn't a failure. It'd been a great victory. For the first time, and as we said, 60 years the people had been away from God. And for the first time they had been reminded about who God was. The negative influence of the prophets was now removed. Elijah was now revered as a prophet of God. Everything was a perfect foundation for Elijah to get out there and to preach and to throw water and a still small voice and grow that seed that he had planted there at Carmel. But instead he sees that Ahab and Jezebel hadn't converted, and so then this has been a great waste of time. But then even further than that, Elijah is also thinking, well, what's God's role in all of this? What's God's position? God, if you stop the rain because the people are wicked, and then you bring back the rain, it must mean that they're converted. But they're not converted. So why did you bring back the rain? What's the fire about? Does it mean that it didn't work? But God can't not work. He's trying to comment, God, what's your role in all of this? This was never part of our plan. And it says there, as we read in verse 3, when he saw that hero. So it's not the specific words or the threat that Jezebel had given him, I don't think. I don't think that the words, it's not when he heard the words, it's when he saw it, and that word can be translated to discern, to perceive. And when he saw that in his mind everything had been a failure, it came crashing down around him. As he tries to work out, and that's what we'll see, the rest of this chapter is trying to put this all back together. What has been the point of all of this? What is God's role in all of this? And remember, we said right at the start, and we've said consistently through, this isn't a story about a national conversion. This isn't a story about rain or fire. It's a story of Elijah here in Kings about God working and preparing a prophet for his role to come in the future. And thirdly, if you take a look at the map here of what happened, Elijah's there in Jezreel. He runs all the way down here. Now, if he wanted to be alone, as he was in Jezreel, well, he could have just walked across the river and he would have been back in Tishbe, in his hometown, in the wilderness of Tishbe, in that area. Nothing was there. It was dry and empty. Even the brook Kedron, where he had hidden out, he could have gone back there. And indeed, if he was afraid for his life, David and all his mighty men hid out there for years in that wilderness and nobody found them. Or He goes straight past Jerusalem, straight past Judah there, where he would have been welcomed with open arms and protected by the righteous king there. So it's not a fear for his life, I don't think. So he goes past all of those places. He's not afraid of his life. He's afraid of what's going on in his life. And he wants to talk to God about that. His problem's not Jezebel, it's God. And so he ran, our record says, for his life, can be translated, should be translated, ran to his life. What do you mean? Ran to confront his life, to address what was going on in his life. And he's got a very specific place in his mind, obviously. That's 160 kilometres, here to Victor Harbour and back. So it's not just a whim, this is a week's worth of walking, maybe a little less. There's a very specific thing in his mind, in a straight line down. But it isn't until he gets to Beersheba that things really start to spiral out of control, to really go into this depressive state. That's where the wheels fall off. We see that verse 4. And he went to Beersheba, and in verse 4, he went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree and requested for himself that he might die. It is enough, O Yahweh, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. So what's the significance of Beersheba? What's the point of the wilderness of Beersheba? Keep your hand here. Come across to Genesis chapter 21. Possibly, we know Elijah was all over the patriarchs. He knew all of the stories about Abraham, Isaac and Jacob and Moses. So he would have been aware of this. Genesis 21. And if we look at verse 31 there to start, wherefore he called the place Beersheba, because they swear both of them together. Beersheba means the place of the covenant, the place of the seven wells. Sheba literally is the number 7. It's the same word we saw in last chapter, when he went up 7 times, Sheba. And we talked about that being the covenant, taking time to form a covenant relationship. So this is what Elijah's been working on, forming a covenant relationship with the people. But what happened here in the wilderness of Beersheba? Well, if you go back to verse 9 of Genesis 21, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had bore unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir to my son, even Isaac. And we see verse 14, this same area, it was the wilderness of Beersheba. So here in Beersheba and here in the wilderness, the natural seed kicks out Hagar and Ishmael and sends them off. And there's lots of similarities between these events, between Elijah and Hagar here. Both are kicked out. Both go off into the wilderness. Both lay under a bush. Both are close to death. Both are visited and sustained by an angel. The similarities are there. And perhaps Elijah got to this point and thought, here, the natural seed kicked out the usurper. And here's me, the natural seed, the one that's righteous, the one that's been doing the work, and I've been kicked out by the imposter, by the Gentile woman that's come in. A complete role reversal of what was supposed to happen back there. No wonder he's thinking, I'm no better than my fathers. I'm the opposite. I've been kicked out. And he wants to, like Hagar, maybe I'm just like Hagar. I'm no good. I'll go out into the desert and I'll die there. Now, obviously God would not take away his life. It's a horrific thing, obviously. And Elijah is not mean. He's saying, I'm no good. I'm useless. I'm just like Hagar. Take away my life. I'm no better than my fathers. And even in that is a glimpse of the mind of Elijah. He expected that he should be better than his fathers. In some way, he thought they weren't good enough. He despised what they had done. And if I can't turn the people around, I'm just as bad as what they were back in that day. And so he flops down in a hopeless sleep and gives up. Well, what is God going to allow that? Come back to 1 Kings 19 here. What does God do with this man here? This man that's in a really, really difficult place. He says, verse 5, and as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, an angel touched him and said, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals, a cruse of water at his head. He did eat and drink and laid back down again. And so once again, we have another incident in this story of Elijah being sustained by God. First the ravens were sent to sustain him, then the widow sustained him, and now an angel is going to sustain. Even it's the same meal as the woman. Some cake baked on coals and some water he had asked for. God is sustaining Elijah. He's reminding him of the work that he had achieved in that woman's house. How when he had used the still small voice, when he had spent time with her and formed that connection as we saw with the son, he was able to convert that family. He's reminding him again of the work. Remember the lesson of the raven, the lesson of the widow? That the little people matter, Elijah. God cares for the ravens, he cares for the widows, and yes, Elijah, I even care for the prophets that have lost their faith, that are struggling. I'm there to look after them as well. I don't wipe them off. I'm there to help and support them. However, there's no reaction from Elijah. And bear in mind, this isn't a common occurrence. God doesn't use miracles. I mean, it seems uncommon in the life of Elijah because you've got fire and ravens and all these things. That's not normal. God hasn't appeared to people. It's not how he operated in this time. Angels didn't just appear. This is an incredible occurrence. But Elijah just rolls back over and goes to sleep. And so verse 7, the angel of Yahweh came again the second time, touched him and said, "Arise and eat. The journey is great for thee." A second time an angel has to appear. So even the mighty Elijah needs two angels before he's stirred to do anything. And he was ready to wipe out the people the first time they didn't get fired up about the fire from heaven. God saying, no, even you, Elijah, need two angels to get stirred up. And God feeds and encourages Elijah. He reassures him that this is not the end. I'm not going to end your life here, Elijah. That's not how I work. Your journey is long. Now, Elijah hadn't mentioned this, but God is denying him the request and saying, no, Elijah, you wanted to come and say something to me. You are on a journey. Let's continue that. I want you to work through this. I want you to keep developing, working through. What did you want to say to me, Elijah? And it's a great example of God treating Elijah in this situation. He handles him with care, with respect. He doesn't say, come on, stop moping around. Get up, we've got work to do, come on. No. He understands that Elijah is trying to work through this. He's processing these events. It's a trial of his faith. And God's there supporting him, helping him. I'm here, Elijah. Come on, let's keep going. What did you want to do? What are we going to do? This isn't a story. This is how God works. It's how God works in our lives as well. We don't have the visible angel there, but it's the same principle. God sustains us and cares us and helps us if we're there willing to allow to be helped. And so Elijah, verse 8, arose and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God, or to Sinai, where this is. So Elijah wandered for 40 days and 40 nights, just like his forefathers in the wilderness there, wandering. See, Elijah wanted to be like the great leader, Moses, but in reality, here at this time, he's just like the people, wandering in the wilderness, needing that same direction. And yes, there's lots of types and that here of the wilderness and him, but on just a purely one-dimensional level, Elijah walked for 40 days and night in that wilderness. I had to get another map because it's not on the usual map. So Beersheba's right up there, and then he walked all the way down here to Mount Sinai. And whilst it seems like a long way, it's probably, I've tried to do the Google Maps things and read what people say, but about, at the most, 20 days journey, probably less. 2 weeks to 20 days. Certainly not a 40-day journey. And then, yes, as I said, that it fits the types, but also this is Elijah. This is him wandering around, mulling everything over in his mind, working through the issues. He's mentally and physically exhausted. He's depressed. For many of those 40 days and nights, he probably didn't get out of bed. He couldn't find the energy to get up again. And so it took him that 40 days. And at the end of that, he made a decision throughout that, halfway through it, that no, I've got a place that I want to go, and I want to go and do something there. It's not an ambly wandering around for 40 days and end up down there. This is a purpose behind this. Now, we don't need to guess what that is. We're told where he goes, and we're told why he goes there. So verse 9, he came thither unto a cave. Now, nearly all the commentators and experts agree that as you probably got there, it's the cave. And it refers to the cave that Moses stood in here at Mount Sinai when he talked with God and God showed him his glory in Exodus 33 verse 12. And we'll come back to that later. So he came to Mount Sinai, he came to the cave, but why? Why after 40 days did he come down here? Well, keep your hand here, come across to Romans chapter 11, because as I said, we don't have to guess about this. We're told specifically why Elijah came to this point. So Romans 11, we'll start at verse 1 there. Paul says, I say then, hath God cast away his people? And the context here is chapter 10, where God is saying at the end of chapter 10 how natural Israel had pushed God aside and God had gone out to the Gentiles. He had chosen other nations because Israel didn't want to be his seed. But, he says in this chapter, does that mean that I've given up on Israel altogether? God forbid. For I am an Israelite, of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin, Paul says. God hath not cast away his people which he foreknew. Wot ye not what the scripture said about Elijah? How he maketh intercession to God against Israel, saying, Lord, they have killed thy prophets, they have digged down thine altars, I am left alone, and they seek my life. So there we have it. Paul tells us, why did Elijah go down to that cave? To seek intercession against the people of Israel. To pray, to interject, as that word is, against Israel. God said, I'm not going to wipe my people away. Verse 4. But what saith the answer of God unto him? I have reserved to myself 7,000 men who have not bowed down to the image of Baal. Even so, at this present time, there also a remnant according to the election of grace. And so he made intercession, and God said, no, I'm not going to do that. That was the point for Elijah, the point for Romans, the point for us is that God is saying, no, I keep a remnant of people that are faithful to my name. Not because that remnant are of themselves personally righteous, and that was Elijah's claim, and I only am left. No, it's not about personal righteousness. I keep them there because because of the love of God and the answer of they're according to the election of grace. So he's not going to wipe them out because they're faithful or not. At the end of the day, God has chosen for his grace to keep a remnant through those ages. And even though Elijah, who we saw, was a man of intense and consistent prayer, everything he had prayed for up until now had been answered with a solid yes. Stop the rain, yes. Bring down the fire, or resurrect the sun, yes. Bring down the fire, yes. But here he comes to pray against Israel. It doesn't matter how great the man is, how passionate his prayers were. If it's against God's will, the answer here in Romans is a resounding no. Elijah, I'm not going to do that. And that's what we have here in the record of Mount Sinai back in Kings. Let's turn there now. What is let's hear Elijah's intercession against the people and God's answer to that. And so he comes, 19 verse 9, he came hither unto the cave and lodged there. The word means camp there. So maybe he'd been here for a while in this cave. Behold, the word of Yahweh came to him. What doest thou here, Elijah? It's a very simple question. It's a very powerful question. Why are you here, Elijah? I didn't send you here. Now, this is the only time Elijah goes somewhere where it's specifically not told, where the word of God came to Elijah and told him to go to the brook Kedroth, or told him to go to the widow, or told him to go back to here. I didn't send you here, Elijah. What are you doing here? We've got all this work to be done. We've just had the success of Carmel. Why are you here in this Sinai by yourself? And here's his answer, verse 10. Elijah turns to God and he said, I have been very zealous for Yahweh Elohim of armies. For the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, slain thy prophets with the sword. I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So he says, I've been zealous, enthusiastic, motivated. I've been the one out there for you. And you may know there that this is the first time that anybody uses this title of God. Elijah almost makes it up, if you will. Yahweh Elohim of armies. So before he's used the name Yahweh Elohim, the covenant name, and he's used the name Yahweh of armies, but here he's combined these two. The covenant name, he who will be mighty. And how will he be manifested by mighty ones? Through force, through armies. That's the God that Elijah has walked down here to talk to. That's who he's looking for. Someone, we've tried to impress the people with fire. We've done all the tricks. It hasn't worked. God, I need you now to bring out your army. That's why I've come down here. That's how he's making intercession against the people. He says the people have forsaken the covenant. They've thrown down the altars. They've slain the prophets. I'm the only one left. What have I done? Well, I've kept the covenant. I've built your altar. I've slain their prophets. And I'm only one left. And it's a serious accusation. Possibly on Carmel, as we said, when he said, I'm the only one here. Well, he was justified in that. He was the only prophet standing up, and there was 450 prophets of Baal. But here, now to God, he'd gone a step further. He's saying, I'm the only righteous person left. All the rest of Israel have forsaken you. And they're trying to kill me. You better hurry up. If I die, there will be no one left. I'm the only one left. You better do something about this quickly before I die. Perhaps is the cry of Elijah to God at this time. Now, this spot that Elijah was, Mount Sinai, is not just the cave. It's Mount Sinai. It's where God gave the law of the covenant, a place that burnt with fire, an earthquake, a place where the covenant was given. And so he comes to the spot and says, you said you're the covenant God. Well, let's see if that's the case. He wanted to see that power again. Let's have a look at that. Come across to Exodus 34. Because God said, I'm going to pass by in front of you. Well, let's have a look. Exodus 34. Let's go back to what Elijah is hearkening back to here. God is going to pass by before Elijah. So Exodus 34 verse 4. With Moses, he hewed 2 tables of stones like the first. Now what happened to the first ones? Well, Moses smashed those in pieces when the people were worshipping idols and bowing down to the golden calf. And here now is the second time round. And Moses rose up early in the morning and went up unto Mount Sinai as Yahweh had commanded him. That's the first difference between these events. What are you doing here, Elijah? I never told you to come here. But Moses goes to this spot just as God had told him to. And he took in his hand 2 tables of stone. And Yahweh descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of Yahweh. And Yahweh passed by before him. It's exactly the same word as we'll see verse 11 of 1 Kings 19. Just as God passed before Elijah, so here now God passes before Moses and proclaimed Yahweh, Yahweh Elohim, merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgression and sin, but by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children's children, unto the 3rd and the 4th generation. And here, when God presents it to Moses, we have the perfect balance of God's character. Merciful, gracious, long-suffering, but also he's righteous. He will by no means allow those that willingly sin against God to be forgiven and to go unpunished. And it's the wonderful character of God. And when Moses hears this character of God, verse 8, what did he do? He made haste, he bowed down his head to the earth and he worshipped. He said, if now I have found grace in thy sight, O Lord, let me, Lord, I pray thee, go among us. It is a stiff-necked people. Pardon our iniquity and our sin and take us for thine inheritance. And here we have the fundamental difference between Elijah and Moses at this same spot. When Moses saw the character of God, he pleaded for the people. He aligned himself with the people. Go among us. Pardon our iniquity, our sin. He's there with the people. Later on, God said to Moses, I want to wipe the people out and just start with you. And he dropped down. He said, please, no, forgive the people. Don't do it. What's the contrast to Elijah we've just seen? Elijah says it's them. I only am left. It's all them that are bad. In fact, wipe them out and start with me. Yes, please. The complete contrast between these two characters. Elijah, as we've seen, based his whole life on Moses, but he didn't understand God. He didn't understand Moses and their relationship, and that's what this is all about. But Elijah didn't see this one side of God. What was the other side that Elijah saw? Well, verse 10, we read on. This is the bit that Elijah focused on. He said, behold, I'll make a covenant. The covenant God. Before all the people, I will do marvels such as never been seen on the earth, nor in any nation. And all the people among them which thou art shall see the work of Yahweh. Is there a terrible thing that I will do? This is what Elijah focused on. The fire from heaven, the rain, these terrible and mighty things. And he says, verse 12 there, take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be a snare for the midst of thee. But ye shall destroy their altars, break down their images, cut down their groves. Thou shalt worship no other God, for Yahweh, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. And so Elijah comes down to this very spot and says, you said you were jealous. I've been jealous for you. Are you jealous? These people were supposed to be a covenant relationship, have gone in for a covenant with the other people. Now come down and visit the iniquity upon them, as you said that you would, to their children's children and the third and fourth generation, and wipe them out. That's what Elijah is asking of God. What's God's response to this? To this understanding, that this misunderstanding of God. Let's see what God says. Come back to 1 Kings. What's God's response to Elijah in this? Verse 11, God took all of this in and said, go forth, stand upon the mount before Yahweh. And behold, Yahweh passed by, as we saw, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before Yahweh. Yahweh was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but Yahweh was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but Yahweh was not in the fire. And so he shows him these awe-inspiring events, these terrible things. A tornado that comes in and rips the rocks off of the mountain, smashing them to the ground below. Next, he shakes the earth, the whole mountain physically moving and shaking. More rocks tumble down, and Elijah is there. He's pushed into the back of the cave. He's huddling, he's afraid. And then this maybe lava, maybe some unnatural fire just flares up. It starts burning the bare rock and desert here as the whole mountain becomes on fire. But what's the summary of those powerful, mighty things, those terrible things that Elijah loved so much? God, your Yahweh, was not in those things. Now obviously they were caused by God, but God's character is not demonstrated in those acts. In fact, what did they do? As we said, they drove Elijah to the back of the cave. It pushed him away from God. On the other hand, what do we see? Verse 12. After the fire, a still small voice. And the still small voice actually brought Elijah out of the cave. That's the difference between the two. You see, that's the problem with these things that Elijah was looking for. Remember, he came to Mount Sinai. This was not the first time these things had happened at Sinai. Exodus 19. And Sinai was altogether on smoke because Yahweh descended upon it in a fire. This is when the law was given. The smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace. The whole mountain quaked greatly, the earthquake. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded, the wind blowing through the trumpet and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and even then as well, it pushed the people away from the mountain. But here, the still small voice. Young's translates it, the sound of a gentle whisper. What a contrast that would have been to what he had just seen. A caring, concerned, authentic voice. As it said, it drew Elijah. Verse 13. And when it was so, when Elijah heard it, he wrapped the mantle in his face and he went out and stood in the cave. It drew him out. There wasn't fear there. There wasn't pushing him away. It drew him closer to know more about God. And behold, there a voice came and said, "What doest thou here, Elijah?" Maybe a slight difference there. Verse 10, it was the word of Yahweh asking the question. Here, it's the voice. What are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah, his mind is whirling with these things that he had just seen. Like Moses before him, he'd just seen the character of God pass before him. He'd seen the goodness and gracious and the mercy was equally as important as the other side that Elijah had known. And his mind is spinning. And so he answers exactly the same response. I think this was a rote response here, but this time I don't think it was with the same passion and intensity that he did the first time. He replies the same. So God says to him, verse 15, Yahweh said unto him, "Go, return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus. When thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. Jehu the son of Nimshi shall thou anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat shall be anointed to be the prophet in thy room. And it shall come to pass that him that escapeth the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay. Him that escapeth the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay." And here's the perfect balance of God. God is a righteous God, Elijah. Ahab, Jezebel, the prophets of Baal, that they cannot worship other gods, persecute God's other people, mock God, and get away with it. God is not all about love. There's truth and there's righteousness. So yes, there will be judgment, Elijah. There will be punishment for what these people have done. But I'm not going to do a blanket wipe out of the whole people. And as we said before, that was the problem with the rain, wasn't it? It fell on the good and the unjust. It affected everybody. That's not how I work, Elijah. There will be a judgment, but it's not going to be wiping out. There's still a remnant that I want you to work with. Verse 18, "Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him." And imagine how Elijah would have felt when he heard that. He genuinely believed he was the only one left. And then to hear there was actually 7,000 people that had not bowed down to Baal, that God considered his people, I think that would have blown him away. We thought, why haven't I seen them? Where have these people been? Well, Elijah, where have you been? Have you been out looking for these people? Have you been there trying to help them? No, he brushed them off. He brushed Obadiah off. He didn't want to have anything to do with them. They're there, Elijah. You just haven't been able to see them. It's an important, fragile remnant, and God's not going to snuff them out. He wants you to work with them, to repair them, to build them up. That we know. There are verses about Christ in Isaiah. He's not going to snuff out the smoking reed. There's a small remnant there, and I want you to work with that, Elijah. So what does Elijah do after Mount Carmel? Has he learnt his lesson? Does he get the point? Well, I believe he has. I believe this is the turning point in Elijah's life. And we'll just touch on a few things as we look at Elijah's life after Mount Carmel to pick up the hints that he's learnt his lesson. So he's a man of obedience. He goes and does what God says. And that's what we have here in chapter 19, verse 19, the rest of the chapter. He departed thence and found Elisha the son of Shaphat, who was ploughing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and him with the 12th. And Elisha passed by him and cast his mantle on him. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, "Let me, I pray thee, kiss me, kiss my father and mother, and when I follow thee, and then I'll follow thee." And he said, "Go back, for what have I done to thee?" Now, we have no record of whether Elijah did the other things that God asked. Possibly not. But the record, as we said, isn't a record of all of this. It's a record of Elijah. And so it records for us what he goes and does. His focus now is on Elisha. And here we have Elisha in complete contrast to Elijah. He was a wealthy man. His family had a large farm which required 12 oxen. It's a significant amount to do it. But notice, Elijah isn't yelling at the oxen. He's not beating them. He's not trying to get them to do things with great signs and miracles. He's in there working amongst them The 12 oxen, mind you, just as we've seen the 12 stones of the 12 tribes, here's a man that gets in there and works with the people. And remember we said there about the sowing of the word. God sows. Elijah ran away before that seed could be planted. But here's Elisha reaping that seed, working there in the land with the 12 things, bringing forth the fruit of the people. And unlike Elijah, he understands people. Elijah has no family. He went off into the wilderness by choice to live by himself. He despised the people. But here, Elisha, I can't just leave. I can't run off and join you, Elijah. What about my mother and father? And they'll wonder about me. I need to go back and take care of them and make sure that they're all okay. He understands people. He works with people. And so here's someone in complete contrast to Elijah. But Elijah goes and he anoints Elisha, and they begin their journey together. He deliberately chooses God. He goes and picks this person. As we saw, Elijah wouldn't have anything to do with anyone that wasn't like him. And here he goes and anoints this person as God asked of him, and they work together. And then we know Elijah doesn't really appear too much in the record after this. There's one or two events, and yes, they're big events of the fire coming down and slaying the soldiers, but Elijah didn't seek that out. Elijah isn't now looking for national conversions. He almost disappears off the scene. For the next 10 years or so, people estimate until he's taken away, he spends his time faithfully going around and building up those 7,000 people. He's not after national conversion or worrying about Ahab and Jezebel. He goes in, and there's at least, at the time of his death, 3 different groups of faithful prophets, of faithful people that are worshipping openly in the land. And he spends his time building up and working with those people. As a final thing, come across to 2 Kings chapter 2. This is the chapter when he's taken away, and we obviously won't deal with it, but I just want to show you 2 verses that I think in stark contrast to the Elijah that we looked at our very first class. Verse 11, "And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, the chariot of fire appeared." Remember that first class when we looked, Elijah only said 3 or 4 things. And even then, when he did talk, it was blunt and cutting and dismissive. Here, we have Elijah walking along with someone that complete opposite to him, that he wouldn't normally have a bar of. He's talking to this person. It's the first we ever hear of Elijah holding a sentence together. And secondly, how is Elijah thought of? Verse 12, "And Elisha saw that him taken away, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And he saw him no more, and he rent his own clothes and rent them in 2 pieces." And so he's now considered a father to these people. He's not the scary lord of the hair that people were afraid of, that they ran away from. Paul says we have thousands of instructors, but not many fathers in the truth. And here Elijah is considered a father, a changed man that spent his time, that built relationships with these people. And that's the full circle of the conversion of this wild, ungainly man. Yes, passionate, but God needed to work with him to prepare him for that role in the kingdom. And as our final verse, come across to Malachi. We've talked throughout this series about the role that Elijah was being prepared for, that his life now was just a preparation. Well, what was that role? What is going to be that role, should I say? Malachi chapter 4. And if we look at verse 4. "Remember ye the law of Moses my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb, for all Israel with statutes and judgments." And Elijah, remember that. We certainly have that all through Elijah's life. Mount Horeb, Sinai on fire, terrible acts of cursings. Verse 5, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of Yahweh." What's his role? "He shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse." Now, there's nothing new there. Elijah's role has always been about, his passion has always been about turning the hearts back to God. That's a phrase that we've seen all through Kings. He was obsessed with the fathers of the nation, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And so he's going to turn their hearts back to the fathers, and the fathers would recognise the people there. That's not what new. That's his passion. That's what he's been wanting to do. But what's the difference here? When is this going to happen? I will send you Elijah before the coming of the great and dreadful day of Yahweh. I will send him lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. This time when he comes, he's trying to stop them from being judged. He's trying to stop them from being wiped out. He desperately goes out into the land, trying to save the individuals before God comes and the dreadful day of God comes upon this people. That's the difference between the Elijah that we've just seen, that made intercession against the people. Here now in his role, God has changed his character, and he goes out before, trying to save the people before it is too late. Realising that these small individual people matter, bringing bands of Jews scattered throughout the land, saving them from the persecution of the Jezebel system, bringing them back out of the land and preparing a people ready to go back into a covenant relationship with their God. That's the amazing transformation that we have seen. God working through this man. And I guess that's the final lesson, if I could look at this, of Elijah's life. Elijah is unique, as we've said, a man that in the record we have his first part of his life with his role to come in the kingdom. And that's what makes him exactly like us. This is, as we've said, our first part of our life now is God shaping and moulding us, preparing us for our real role in the kingdom. And if Elijah, this strong, passionate man that was unchanging, can be worked and changed by the still small voice of God, it's a wonderful encouragement for us in our lives now. If we are passionately committed to God, as Elijah was, if we have the genuine care for our brothers and sisters, if we allow God to work in our lives and feed ourselves in the still small voice of God, if we allow our character to change, to match his son's, then we also can have that wonderful role that God has hand-selected for us already in the kingdom to fulfill that wonderful role forever.
BibleTruthAndProphecy.com is a worldwide collaboration by Christadelphians to help promote the understanding of God's Word to those who are seeking the truth about the human condition and God's plan and purpose with this earth and with mankind upon it. Bible Truth and Prophecy is part of a wider set of online resources provided by Christadelphianvideo.org for establishing just how far removed the true Christian teaching of the first century apostles is from that taught by mainstream Christendom today. BibleTruthAndProphecy.com is very much a standalone website, but benefits from our vast network of sites and resources and social media. Here are just a few of the things that BibleTruthAndProphecy.com offers. We have a good number of written articles supplied to us from brothers from all over the globe. These deal with first principle issues, creation versus evolution, the inspiration of the Bible, and so much more. We have a whole section of video study series. These are studies that have been posted onto our YouTube channel, but because of the difficulty of the search feature within YouTube, we have chosen to host on Bible Truth and Prophecy. So now every video you search for within the site, you can be guaranteed that it will be of a Christadelphian nature. We also have a preaching video section where any ecclesia is invited to download and use or embed these videos within their own ecclesial websites. We also have an exhortation service where we produce 2 or 3 exhortations per week, which we then circulate to brethren and sisters in isolation. We also have an ever-growing list of approved Christadelphian sites. We also have a page of live news feeds, so you can keep up to date with all the breaking news as it happens. We also have a section for the daily readings. Each day at around midnight we publish all 3 of the daily readings, and then later on in the day we publish Thought for the Days, often based on all 3 portions of the daily readings. Within each daily reading post there is also a link to enable you to have the Bible chapter read to you directly. We also feature Bible in the News videos which we have produced from the Bible in the News website. We also feature Brother Don Pierce's milestone snippets, which come out approximately 3 times a week. We also feature Andy Walton's weekly World Watch, and other commentaries and analysis from other brethren on world news events. You can also subscribe to the blog and be notified of posts as they happen in real time, and also subscribe to the weekly newsletter which is provided by Christadelphianvideo.org. Every page and post on the site has the facility to be able to leave a comment or make an observation, so please take advantage of this and let us know what you think of the site.